Welcome to Agile Coaches Corner by Agile Thought, the podcast for practitioners and leaders seeking advice to refine the way they work and pave the path to better outcomes. Now, here's your host, coach, and Agile expert, Dan Neumann.
Welcome to the Agile Coaches Corner. I'm Dan Neumann, and today I'm excited to be joined by Felipe Castro, who is an expert on objectives and key results, spends a lot of time talking at conferences, delivering training, and is an author. So very excited to be exploring OKRs with you today.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
I know I've learned a lot from, I've seen you deliver live presentations, and then you have some really nice artifacts on your website, felipecastro.com, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can get the spelling of that. And I was curious, for folks who don't have an inkling for what OKRs or objectives and key results are, could you maybe give them a little bit of a working definition on that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. OKR, or objective and key results, is an agile approach to setting goals and creating alignment. It was created in Silicon Valley and used by several companies, including Google, Twitter, Airbnb, Dropbox. Several companies use objectives and key results. As the name implies, you have an objective, which is a qualitative description of what you want to achieve, and a set of key results that actually measure if you're succeeding, measure if you're actually being successful.
I was watching one of the talks, and you said it's okay, like the objective ought to be memorable. Like you said, it's qualitative. It's something that's maybe a catchy tagline. It's okay to use the word awesome in an objective.
Oh, yeah. There's a very useful way to think about it. Intel created the original concept behind OKR in the 70s and 80s, and then Google took it and then improved it, etc. But the original concept was, to create a good goal, you have to state, there's a formula that they use, which is I will, and then you say as measured by. So there's two components: what you want to achieve, but also how you're going to measure it. So the crucial words are as measured by. The idea is, in the current more modern approach to OKR, that you try to create that I will part, that what you do, make it more compelling, make it more motivating, inspiring, because goals don't have to be boring, right? So you can either write it in a very boring way, but you can make it fun, creative, right? You can use awesome, you can use words such as kick-ass. It depends on your culture. You can actually write great sentences. There's a classic example of objective from Google from 2008. Make the web as fast as flipping through a magazine, right? That's clear, right? You want to make the web fast. That's inspiring. That's something you can relate to. That's memorable, right? Made a lot of sense in 2008, right? So that's the idea of an objective, right? One that I was working with an engineering team, and they created one which was party like it's 99.99% uptime. So instead of saying world-class availability or something very boring, they created, this is something that's memorable, that's interesting. The idea is that the objective should be clear first and easy to remember, but it doesn't have to be creative. It doesn't have to be that's not the point. You can do that if you want, but it can be also simple, something that describes a problem. And that's something that has to be clear, memorable, describes a problem, right? The key results are, they answer the as measured by part. How do you know it's succeeding? How do you know it's working? Right? How do you measure if you're being successful? And the main thing people notice around OKR is that instead of planning for the whole year, you plan around quarters. So usually the natural cadence of OKR is quarterly planning. So you plan every quarter, right? You also can have annual, longer-term OKRs for high-level stuff, but usually the teams, they plan around the quarter. You can customize that, but most teams start with quarterly planning, and that's really fits the Agile approach, right? You learn from it, you iterate during the quarter. Right? So that's so describe OKR in a tweet. I would say OKR is a system that forces you to sit down with your team every quarter and discuss how are you going to measure that we're being successful. That's it. Conversation every quarter, simple one. That's it.
And you were discussing, we were talking a little bit before this and exchanging some emails, and really focusing on outcome-based planning. So objectives and key results is focusing on the outcomes. And I think that would be as opposed to activities. So outcomes versus tracking tasks.
Yeah. The idea is OKR is just a means to change the way people work. It's just a means of the forcing function to enable you to adopt new ways of working, right? And the core of that is the concept of outcome-based planning. The idea is that we plan around the outcomes we want to achieve instead of a series of activities, of projects, features that may or may not work, right? And the idea is that instead of giving the teams a feature to build, you give them a problem to solve. You give them an opportunity to tackle, right? So you don't say build this. You say, hey, that's the big customer problem. That's what you're talking about. Explain the context, explain the strategy, and let the teams come out with ideas. Let them innovate. They can test several different ideas, run experiments, and then figure out what actually works, what will actually move the needle. So outcome-based planning is the stepping stone for creating powerful, small teams that can actually drive innovation, and they are the heart of Silicon Valley success, right? So creating those networks of small, powerful teams, and outcome-based planning is crucial for that.
I know war metaphors get overused, but the one that came to mind was, seizing a hill. Like the objective is to take the hill, or like you said with the search, the objective is to make search as fast as flipping through a magazine. The how around that then is really up to the team, or whether it's as they go for that objective. Is that valid?
Yeah, usually the way I like to describe it is the why comes from leadership, right? That's the context. That's what we're trying to do. That's how it fits into overall strategy, right? And then together with the teams, they talk about the what. Okay, given that's the context, given that's what we're trying to achieve as an organization, right? What your team can contribute to that. And then we have a conversation, okay? And as part of the conversation is what we're going to measure. The as measured by is part of that. So the team can come up with a set of metrics and then presents to the leadership, and then there's back and forth. Right? There's what we call bi-directional conversation.
So it's not a handoff. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not a handoff of
no, it's not.
Here's the objective. I don't care how you get there. It's it's a collaborative effort to build the how.
Yeah, yep. and the challenges. First of all, two challenges. Right. One of the most common mistakes in OKR is to treat OKR as a glorified to-do list, right? It just lists all the deliverables, because we are used to thinking about activities, right? We used to think about that's how we used to work. That's how our brains are wired. And also, most people never worked in a company where they have to think about outcomes before, right? So making a distinction between, hey, what we want to achieve and how we're going to measure is successful versus our ideas, activities that may or may not work, that's crucial, right? Making this distinction, right? Mm-hmm. For people who work in Agile, there's two techniques that you can use. First of all, if it fits in Jira, it's not a key result, right? If something that is so don't copy things from Jira, right? Jira is important. Agile frames are very important for tracking deliverables, tracking activities, right? OKR is how you measure if those things are working. Okay, so outcomes are, okay, we launched a feature. If nobody's using, who cares? Mm-hmm. Right? And there's a great technique to help you, very simple is technique to help you create great key results, which is the so what test. Good key results, they make difference. They add value for your company, your employees, your customers, and they pass the so what test. So imagine your team you have 10 minutes to present your OKRs to the board, right? That's it. And you go in there and say, oh, my first key result is to deliver the new app. So what? I don't want an app. I want people using it. I want to. How do I know my customers are using it? Do they like it? Is it helping any issues? Are we making money out of it? An app that nobody uses, I don't. So what? Right? Or you can say, I'm launching this new marketing program. So what? I don't want a new marketing program. That's not the goal, right? So if you keep asking the so what question, it helps people create better and better OKRs. The first time you do it sounds very aggressive, in your face attitude. But as you learn, you say, I'm actually helping people by asking the so what question, right? So very simple task to say, hey, this adds value. Does it make sense? How do you measure if you're actually succeeding, right?
Yeah, I like that so what test. And again, before we clicked on record, we were talking about sprint reviews in Scrum. And sometimes, let's say we developer, I'll put on my stereotypical developer hat, sometimes wants to show a piece of code or show an activity or show a thing that they did. And I think that so what test also applies there. So why did we invest time doing the activity to build the thing? Like what's important about that to the overall objectives that team is trying to achieve?
Yeah. So lots to unpack in there. First of all,
well, and if it's too much of a rat hole, we can come back to the mistake.
No. We can. Okay. I love to take that opportunity. But first of all, the main idea of outcome-based planning is that we, instead of giving teams feature to build, we give them problems to solve, right?
Okay.
So it's not about, hey, stakeholder, what do you want? Let me build you whatever you want. It's actually, hey, that's the problem. Now go ahead and try to solve it.
So a problem that I encountered at one place was they had an abandonment rate they were selling insurance through a website, and one of their problems was a huge abandonment rate as people would go through this funnel. And so that's the problem then that they were asked to solve. Okay.
Exactly.
As opposed to
give me this feature, right? So the idea is, especially dealing with technology, the best ideas often come from people who have handled that technology. Engineers are often the best have the best ideas on how to solve what technology just enables us. Designers can come up with usability issues, etc. Programmers. So give them problems to solve, right? And there's a big shift away from the way agile frameworks tend to work, right? So if you think about the classic book from Sutherland, twice the work in half the time, that's an efficiency metric that doesn't pass the SOA test, right? So I delivered twice the work in half the time, but nobody used it. Nobody bought it. It didn't make any money. Our customers are not happy about it. There's no value in it. So what? Right? So instead of doing that, I want twice the outcomes, right? I don't. Maybe it's half the work or not.
Twice the outcomes and half the but really focusing on the outcomes as opposed to the time for sure.
So we need to. One of the things that is sometimes hard for people who are in Agile is that we need to unlearn some concepts. Agile is still crucial. Agile is still very important, but to take the next step, we need to move closer to what we're trying to achieve. A real autonomous team, self-organized team, focuses on outcomes, right? It's not about telling you what to do, right? It's not about, hey, stakeholder, what do you want? And I'll go out and build that and deliver for you, right? And the challenges, and sometimes people who are very, let's say, dogmatic about Agile, they have a problem with it, is that the manifesto is a historical document. It described how people worked in 2001. It was never meant to be, hey, that's a religious document. You can change, you can evolve, because it goes against the very idea of Agile, which is to learn and improve, right? So if you go to the manifesto is actually wrong, because the seventh principle states the primary measure of progress is work in software, which is a very output-based, activity-based view of the world. So if you ship a software that's working that has 0 bugs, it can still have 0 value because it doesn't solve the customer problem. Nobody's using it. They don't like it. So what, right? So in Agile, we talk a lot about value, but there's an evolution on how we perceive value, right? If you look at historically, what before Agile, the proxy for value was, are we following the plan?
Right. Oh man, I waterfall project managed, and did we have the right estimates? Were our actuals tracking to the estimates? Oh yeah, man, if you were on that schedule, you were a rock star PM.
That's the proxy for value, right? In waterfall, right? Are you following the plan? That's it, Then comes Agile and says, oh, no, the plan is a terrible proxy for value. Don't do that. Things change. Embrace uncertainty. And then they say the proxy for value is working software. The proxy for value is regularly showing working software for your stakeholders and getting their opinion. Right? That's the proxy for value they had in 2001. Right? They had the idea of the voice of the customer, because a developer can never talk to a customer. Oh my God, that's impossible, right? So you have to have the voice of the customer, right? Somebody telling you what to do. Almost 20 years later, that doesn't represent how high performance teams work anymore, right? Because the opinion of the stakeholder is just that, their opinion, right? And we need to move away from the HIPPO model, which is highest paid person opinion, right? It turns into a HIPPO, right? And instead of asking for stakeholders their opinion, we actually show to real customers, put them in their hands and get them to use it, right? Real users, right? So you make decisions based on real evidence and not on the opinion of the stakeholder. So sometimes when I explain outcome-based planning for teams, say, no, we focus on value. No, you don't. You focus on the proxy you use is really bad. You focus on getting the opinion of the stakeholder. I want you to move away from it. And now I want you to measure better lead indicators for value. Do a prototype, do an A/B test, show actual products to actual users, right? And those are the lead indicators of future business impact that you can deliver, right? So into 2020, we don't need somebody to be the voice of the customer anymore. People can run experiments. They can interview customers. They can do user research, right? So in that approach, some of the Agile frameworks and the language that we use no longer represent how high-performance teams work in 2020.
Have a topic you want us to tackle? Send an email to podcast@agilethought.com or tweet it with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast.
That's a good set of examples, and I think that all kind of fits under that the mistake of treating OKRs as a glorified to-do list. It's really shifting away from whether your to-do list is user stories or tasks or whatever the case might be, shifting to really a focus on outcomes.
Definitely, and first of all, using OKRs to track activities is a huge waste of time. Lots of people are starting to use OKR and they get burned by it. Oh, it's not working, etc. Because you're just using it as a copy of Jira. Sorry, putting the same information in two places doesn't add value, right? And by the way, it's very common for engineers to say, I don't see the value in OKR, because they see the same information in two places. And I say, why do I need this new thing if I have Jira or whatever I'm using, right? I have my backlog, I have my roadmap, right? So the idea is an OKR is about the outcomes you want to achieve. Jira, your backlog, is different ideas, so you can test them quickly, iterate, and find what works.
Yeah, put your experiments in there. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think you said there were two mistakes. So one of them was a glorified to-do list, treating OKRs as a glorified to-do list.
Yeah, and there's several
there's several,
fake news around or bad advice out there around OKR. But when you move away from that idea of OKR is not a to-do list, I need to shift from that model where, again, I give teams problems to solve. And it's very common when I work with companies. Yeah, they embrace the outcome. Yeah, makes sense. You should do that. Yeah, we need to measure things are working. They embrace it. But they still see the role of engineers as, yeah, they assist to code. That's what they do. Telling an engineer, giving an engineer a problem. Who knew? Engineers are problem. I'm an engineer, right?
They kind of like to solve problems. That's what gets them excited.
Yeah, that's why you become an engineer, because you like to solve problems. So instead of just telling them a technical problem, give them the whole problem. Get their opinion. And they'll find ways to use technology to solve a customer problem, a business problem, whatever. That's the whole idea of a tech-enabled business, right? So even tech leaders sometimes fall into that model where, no, my job is to code, right? And Marty Kagan, who is the reference in tech product management, the thought leader, usually says that if you're using your engineers to code, you're getting half their value. Right? If you only use engineers to code, you're getting half their value. I strongly recommend reading Marty's book, Marty's work. You can go to svpg.com, the website. He just posted an article saying that the thing that the most important step is to have empowered engineers that can actually focus on the solutions, discuss the problems, and not only build features, right? So that's something that even people in Agile struggle with, because the old model, people are so used to it that they find a hard time thinking about, we can actually tell them, let them use their talent, right?
Yeah, I think back to the Skunk Works project that led to like the stealth fighters. I can't imagine that somebody was telling the engineers exactly how they were going to build it. They're like, what we need is a jet that doesn't show up on the radar. You go figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. And again, this idea of autonomy is not new by any chance. Throughout history, several groups that were working with uncertainty, they always come down to the same model: autonomous teams focus on a mission. You talked about military, right? There's a concept of mission command, which is very similar. Describe the context, give them a problem to solve. That's it. This goes down all the way to the Prussian army in 19th century, goes all the way back to innovation labs in the 40s and 50s. So in the end, it's about giving them the autonomy to solve problems, right? Let them do the work, right? Trust them. But it's not about letting them do whatever they want, right? They are accountable for the results. They should be, you get to that. And we say accountable, I'm saying in a positive accountability, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning I own this, I'm connected to it. I'm not talking necessarily about punishment, but hey, you have to own this thing. You have to care about it. That's being accountable in a positive way.
Yeah, accountability, for the longest time, and even a lot of times now, I still hear it. It's a euphemism for being able to fire somebody if they screw up. And that's just such an unfortunate thing. And then at one point I heard somebody say, accountability really means give an accounting for. So give an accounting for why you made those decisions. Was it reasoned, et cetera? It's not you get fired if you screw up, but it's being able to explain why you went this way, the decisions you made, and how they were, hopefully, in this case, in search of an outcome that was planned.
Yeah, definitely. When you say accountability, is not about punishment, right? But about, hey, do I care about it? Do I own this result? Yeah, we did this, we tried it, didn't work, but I care about it, I own it, I'm trying to work on it, versus I don't really care, right? I'm not doing anything, right? So it's being accountable in a positive way. Right? It's not about punishment. One of the things you have to have, there are some enabling factors to work with outcome-based planning, right? And one of them is psychological safety, right? Which is a concept that was developed by a professor from Harvard, Amy Edmondson. And then after several years, Google did a study and found, hey, that's the main factor that distinguishes high-performance teams from the rest. So psychological safety is an environment where people feel safe to give ideas, express, talk, right? And this is a crazy idea. Let me talk about it, or talk about the problem we're having. So that level of psychological safety for sharing and expressing ideas is crucial to making outcome-based planning work. And definitely, if you have an environment where everybody is afraid of punishment, psychological safety is the first thing that goes away, right?
Yeah. So when there's a lack of psychological safety, it's an inability to bring forward new ideas, or ideas that might be ridiculed or aren't kind of safe ideas to offer.
Exactly. So the thing is, if you think about the concept of goals, they have a very bad rap in companies today, right? You say goals, people think about, oh gosh, that thing I have to do once a year, then they punish me, and then I don't know what's that, and then that changes, and there's a form. So they have a very bad rap, right? And it's very common for people to say, but OKRs are not goals. I say, sorry, OKRs are within the general category of goals. They're just not your standard corporate ways of doing goals, right? So first of all, goals work. We have 50 years of scientific research that, when properly used, goals improve performance, right? But OKR is not the traditional way of setting goals, so we have to change. One very obvious thing we need to change is, if you want people to work in teams, how can we still evaluating them as individuals. That doesn't make sense, right? So there's a great quote from Doc Norton. He says, "We want you to try to innovate and work as a team while working for individual goals that you can miss." Right. So
it's a total disconnect. And then reward systems, financial reward systems, get tied to the goals that you can't miss, and it's a wonder why people get dysfunctional at times about those. And one of the differences with objectives and key results, as I understand it, is these are more they're very aspirational. They're stretched. They're like I said, qualitative reaches, and so you're not expected to hit 100% of your objectives and all the key results. Is that help fix what I said? Yeah.
That's another misconception, right? One of the things around OKR is that OKR was crowdsourced. Right? It was not created by a consultant or an academic, right? It was created by practitioners, people that were doing their job, like CEO of a company or investor or engineer or whatever, and they improved over time. So there are several different versions of it. So, and on one end, it's good because it's highly customizable. On the other end, it's very confusing because people give you very different opinions, right?
Okay.
One of the common misconceptions around OKR is that every single OKR has to be aspirational. The idea is you have to shoot for the moon. And if you go online, you say every single key result, the idea is that you should reach it. The sweet spot for achieving a target is 70%, right? And that's the myth, right? So let me break it down. First of all, that 70%, there's zero science around it. Zero. That's completely made up, right? There's zero science around 50%, achieving 50% or 100%. So completely made up. Zero science around it. That's just a rule of thumb that Google created, and that's it, right? And maybe and by the way, if you go to, say, Google X, which is where they create the autonomous cars, etc., they have to work with 20% because it's way more ambitious than the regular product.
Okay, so a much lower expectation.
So you can have different approaches, right?
Okay.
So it's not one size fits all. You can also have OKRs that are similar to regular goals, where, hey, we expect to achieve around 100%, right? Some of those things will be aspirational because they're unpredictable. Some of those things will be more regular. Yeah, we expect to achieve this. So when you're working with more regular results, those are for keeping the trains running on time. I need this number to be more predictable. When I'm working with innovation, where I'm trying really hard things, you can try more aspirational stuff, right?
Okay, so kind of connecting it to the there's a framework, the 3 horizons, and I think I'd seen this reference. Yeah. So for the Horizon 1 stuff, your bread and butter, what you're doing all the time, you would expect the trains should arrive on time. We should be very good at that. And if we're shooting for the moon or Google X, then maybe a lower attainment rate of OKR.
That's one way to think about it, but you can also have things that you're doing that should achieve results this quarter, but it's an experiment, a new idea. We never tried it before, right? So it can be still things that you, for which we call Horizon 1, like improving the existing business, but it's aspirational because we never did it before, right? So it's more around predictability than if it's disruptive or not. Right? And every single company I work with, and I work with thousands and thousands of people over the last 6 years, I always recommend is start with things that are predictable. Start with targets that are like regular goals. Start with things that are hard but achievable. You expect to achieve around 100% of that. But it's much easier. Adopting OKR as a journey. Many people present OKR, that's a big bang goal. It doesn't exist. And especially people coming from Agile, I hope that people coming from Agile understand, hey, it's a journey. You don't take it and adopt it exactly as is. You don't copy Google because you're not Google. And by the way, there's a great quote from my friend Dan Montgomery. It says, don't copy Google. Not even Google copies Google because Google works in several different ways, right?
Yeah.
So don't do that. So it's a journey. improve over time. Baby steps.
Yeah, it's. I wonder if the urge to copy Google is much like the urge, to copy IBM back in the day. It's like nobody gets fired for selecting IBM as the vendor. Nobody gets fired for trying to copy IBM or GE's model of, you stack rank people and you chop the bottom off. Like, because if GE was doing it, it must be okay. It just, the mimicry urge, I think, is pretty strong and maybe it's related to psychological safety.
Definitely that's related to psychological safety, right? The analogy is perfect, right? Nobody was fired to buy IBM. Because if I follow something to the book, right? I'm following the book, you can always blame the book, right? Hey, I just followed Google and it didn't work. You can always blame the book. But often what's happening is you didn't customize to your context, right? Mm-hmm. So the very same things we have with Agile, we have it with OKR, right?
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. You need to understand the principles and customize it to your reality. And yes, there are some techniques on how to apply those principles in practice, but it's always customizable. It's always about what's working for you. Exactly. Different techniques will work in different contexts.
Yeah. So you were saying one of the maybe advantages and anchors that Agile has is there is an Agile manifesto. There's the values, there's the 12 principles, right or wrong, they get referenced, etc. And then OKRs have emerged, kind of crowdsourced practitioners. There isn't a canon of OKRs. What would you point somebody to when around the principles of OKR? So if they're trying to take the principles and adapt them for their context instead of copying a Google or somebody else, what would be a good resource for folks to kind of start learning?
Yeah, one of the challenges of OKR, right, is that the main reference we have today, or most people have, is a book called Measure What Matters, written by John Doerr, John Doerr is probably the most successful venture capitalist of all time. He worked at Intel, where he learned OKR, and then he introduced OKR to Google and several other companies, right? Doerr was an early investor in both Google and Amazon, right? So he's an amazing investor. He's called the Michael Jordan of venture capitalists. He has a book on OKR again, Measure What Matters. The thing is, the theory and the stories on the book are amazing, really, really good, but the examples are terrible, right? The examples really let the book down, which is, when the book was launched like 2 years ago, was, oh gosh. And I really wish they would do a second edition with new examples. So the book has some very good examples from Google and YouTube, but some really bad ones, right? So that's confusing for people.
Okay.
Right? So that's another challenge with OKR. And that's why I started talking about outcome-based planning, right? Because as a principle, if you understand the principle, we plan around what you want to achieve. We give the team the autonomy on how to achieve those outcomes. Right? We plan around it. We organize around it. We track those. That's much easier for people to grasp. Okay, that's a good OKR. That's not, right? Because again, OKR is just a means to an end, right? It's how to apply those outcome-based principles in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been saying for a while now, if tomorrow there's a better tool for doing that, I'll shift to a better tool tomorrow. So far, there's no better tool for implementing OKR, but outcome-based planning than OKR, right?
Okay.
Some people have been burned by the brand. For some people, OKR is completely new, which is good. Some people tried OKR in the past, saying, that didn't work. It's like saying, we tried Azure, that doesn't work.
I hear that a lot. I do hear that a fair amount, yeah.
Yeah, and I say, I actually know quite a few companies that use Agile and were successful, so maybe you should talk to them.
And I like to follow that up with, so when you say Agile, what does that mean? What did you do that was called Agile? Because I've heard some people describe things that, and again, so the principles are historic, but you look at what they were doing and it's like, well, okay, so you ignored technical excellence and it bit you in the butt. That's not a big surprise. Oh, you didn't actually talk to your customer. That's a problem and not something I would consider Agile. And so you get a chance to, so when somebody says, OKRs didn't work for me, Well, great. Well, what did they look like? How did you use them? How were they rolled out?
Yeah,
great
exactly.
questions to follow up with.
And even if you take something like Scrum has the guide, right? The guide is constantly updated. It has 2 authors, so there's a reference, right? You can ask them, right? Even something like Scrum, people still they still do crazy stuff with that. Imagine OKR, which is crowdsourced. With OKR, the problem is way bigger, right? So people do crazy stuff, right?
I love it. Yep. And you've got a beginner's guide to Scrum on your website, so we'll point. Geez, man, we'll leave that blooper in there. But yes, you have a beginner's guide to OKRs on your website, and that I found that to be a really handy reference too. Just a real concise PDF.
Yeah, I have a beginner's guide to OKR. I have posts on Agile and OKR. I have several webinars for that. I mean, examples, several tools. There's lots and lots of material in there. But again, for people coming from Agile, I've learned that the most important thing is understanding that you need to unlearn certain things, right? We need to evolve. We need to learn that. So that's also looking at, hey, this is a historical document, huge contribution, very important. Let's just tweak it, right? Because some of those things don't make sense anymore. I'm not saying the whole thing doesn't make sense anymore, right? Some of those aspects, right?
Understood. Kind of revisit some of. I love it. Time has flown from my perspective, hopefully from yours and from our listeners as well. One of the questions a lot of times we ask folks at the end is, what are you reading, or what's got you excited from a continuous learning journey? And I also understand you're working on a book that will be coming out in the future. I don't know if could you elaborate on either of those? What are you learning about these days, and then maybe a little bit about your to be coming out book at some point.
Yeah, I'm writing a book on outcome-based planning in OKR. The title is Aligned: How to Use Outcome-Based Planning in OKR to Drive Business Impact. And it's about how to use that in practice, what are the principles and the techniques to use it in practice. Because I've learned you have to do both the principles and the techniques to put it in practice. But I've reading a lot, I think, books that I recommend. When you start working the outcome-based planning, one of the things people really struggle with is, okay, now I don't have a feature. How do I choose which feature? How do I run experiments? How do I test my ideas quickly? So how to test ideas quickly, how to run experiments, that's a major gap that most people have. And that's a key enabler of outcome-based planning. So we have 2 books that came recently around experiments. The first one is Testing Business Ideas. Again, Testing Business Ideas by David Bland. Right? The second one is by Ron Kohavi, called Trustworthy Online Experiments. Ron Kohavi used to run the experiments platform at Amazon. Then he did that for Microsoft, and now he's at Airbnb. So he kind of knows how to run experiments.
So he's done a couple things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And David's book is very practical guide, several examples of experiments and when to use which one. So I strongly recommend, if you want to move to outcome-based planning, learning how to do experiments is crucial. So
testing business ideas and trustworthy online experiments.
Exactly.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll go read those. I have not read either of them. I've seen stuff and consumed things from Bland in the past, and it's been good. And I'll look forward to picking up some new things.
Fantastic.
Wonderful, Felipe. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to share outcome-based planning with us.
Thanks for having me.
This has been the Agile Coaches Corner podcast, brought to you by Agile Thought. The views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and the guests, and do not necessarily represent those of Agile Thought. Get the show notes and other helpful tips from this episode and other episodes at agilethought.com/podcast.